So let me welcome everybody. Let me welcome you to the Future Trends Forum. I'm very glad you're all here today. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm your host, the creator of the forum, and your cat herder for the next hour. And we have quite a guest to talk with and quite a lot to cover. So let's get started. To begin with, let me explain a bit about where all the forum came from, who supports it, and how it works. So let's go over to the next slide, please. Key thing to think about is that this is a discussion-oriented platform. So what I'm doing now, actually talking to you with slides, that's going to go away in 3 minutes. The key thing here is to have conversation. And this conversation spins out of a research project I do called the Future Trends in Technology and Education Report, or FTTE. If you don't know that, it's a monthly trends analysis that's been going on for years now, where we track around 86 different trends that are impacting education and technology. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, go to ftte.us, download a few sample copies, and sign up. Now, another thing you should know about this, let's go to the next slide, is that what we're doing here is as transnational as possible. So that means that we have guests from all over the world. As you can see today, we have guests from Denmark. And we have as well participants from all over the place. We've had guests from multiple continents and participants from every continent in the world. Another thing about this is that this is a project that you're seeing that is part of a larger effort to create media for the future of education and technology. So along with the FTTE report, there is a blog. There's also a monthly book club, which has just begun with our new reading. There's this Future Trends Forum, and there's more coming up. So if you haven't seen all of that effort, go to futureofeducation.us. and you can see some more. Now, we can only do this work with the support of sponsors because all this work is free and open. And so I want to pause for a moment to thank some of them. First of all, let me thank NYSERDnet from New York State. This is a nonprofit that works to get that state's universities, colleges, libraries, museums, and medical schools all online. We're very grateful to them for their support. We're also grateful to Shindig because, as you can see, Shindig makes available this technology. So let me just walk you through it so you can see where everything works. If you're familiar with video conferencing technology, this has a few different bells and whistles. So to begin with, where I am right now and where this slide is, this is the stage. Everybody can hear and see what's going on up here. This is where our guest is going to be, and this is where any of you can be. In fact, we can have up to 4 different people up here at the same time. Now, below us is what I call the audience or participant swarm. If you look around, you can see a whole bunch of different people. You can see Brenda or Jonathan or Dave or Michael all looking somewhat surprised that I'm talking about them. And sometimes you can see a black silhouette where a person's camera isn't on. So that's where you can see Carol, for example, or Taylor or Lara. Each of those represents one person or one sign-in. Now, if you'd like to connect with a person or sign in, you can double click on them. And if they want to talk to you, your 2 icons will click together like Lego bricks, and you'll have your own private audio-visual bubble, which is a great way to have conversation. Now, there are a lot of ways to have conversation here, and I just want to mention a few of them that you can use over the next 55 minutes. So to begin with, if you go down to the bottom of the screen, there's a white strip that runs across it, and that has a whole bunch of key icons. So look on the far left edge, you'll see there's a number. Right now, I think it's 40 with some heads on it. That's the number of everybody who's in on this video conference as of this second. If you click on it, you'll get to see a little icon video feed representing every one of them. So you can see Ed Garay looking at us, Joe Kornberg with his headset on. You can see Brenda, or you can't see Brenda, but you can see her place. So you can see where people are, which is kind of fun. Now, next to that is a text chat box. So if you haven't done this, click on that. And it'll pop up a chat box that'll let you talk to the nearest 18 or so people who have come into the forum with you. That's a very simple chat box. It works just like everything people are used to. Give that a try. Take a minute to say where you are and who you are. So far, most recently, we've had greetings from Texas, from Ohio, from San Francisco. That's a great place to have any kind of questions or comments as we go. And you'll find that people often share things there, including links to stuff that comes up. Now, on that white strip in the bottom of the screen, next to that is another button. It's a question mark with a circle around that. If you click that, up will pop a little window into which you can type a comment or a question. Now, that's a different thing because then we can take that comment or question and splash it on the screen, and I'll read it out loud so everyone can hear it. So that's a really good way if you want to ask the guest or me or another person a specific question, or you want to share a thought or a comment. So that's very, very useful. And you'll see as we go, people like using that. Now, in the middle of the white strip is the best option of all. It's a raised hand. If you click that, that tells us that you want to join us on stage. So if you've got a good connection, if your mic and your camera are working, and you're at a place where you can speak out loud, click that, and you can join us on stage and ask Professor Norgard and myself and everybody else questions and comments. Again, those are 3 different ways, 4 different ways, really, that you can participate and talk with each other. And that's what this is about. I'm really grateful to Shindig for making this technology available. I'm also grateful to dozens and dozens of people who support this on Patreon. If you haven't seen it, Patreon is a crowdfunding site like Kickstarter or GoFundMe. The difference here is that it's a subscription service that supports creative people making stuff. So poets, painters, musicians, or in my case, someone who's making media for the future of education. So if you go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander, you'll see all these different people who signed up to support as little as $1 a month to keep the lights on, to keep everything going. And here on the screen, I want to have a special shout out to people like Michael Haggins, Jeannie Kiman, Paul McConaughey, Kyle Johnson, and Bob Johnson, who've really contributed a lot. And we're very grateful to them for their support. Now that you know how the technology works, now that you know where the support comes from and where this whole project comes from, let's talk about our guest. So today's guest is a very, very special one. This is someone from Aarhus University in Denmark. And I'm going to mangle her name, and she will pronounce it correctly. I'm sorry again, as I should be able to do this correctly, but this is Rikke Toft Norgard, who is a professor at the Center of Teaching Development and Digital Media at Aarhus University in Denmark. I've seen presentations she's given. I've read articles that she's given. I've heard fantastic things about people who've been around her where she's giving talks. She is easily one of the foremost people in Europe trying to envision what the next university could be like. And as such, I'm delighted to have her on the show. Good evening, Professor Norgard.
Good evening. And,
how are you doing?
My name is Rikke Toft Norgard. So you almost said it correctly.
Oh, I'm trying. I'm trying very hard. Well, I may have to just call you Professor from now. But let me thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you making the time. And it's a real treat after reading your articles and seeing your presentations to be able to have you connect with this community here. Just to begin with, let me start off by asking, what do you mostly work on right now in your position? What do you teach and what do you research?
Yeah, so right now my research is really trying to get a handle of what I call mode 3 institutions. And mode 3 institution is kind of where the university is going, and where a lot of educational institutions are going, trying to get out of the knowledge factory or the competence machine. You surely have that in the States as well, I would reckon, trying to deliver certain kinds of competencies. But try to get out of the competence machine in a way that doesn't lock us back up in the ivory tower. So what is that? What is the future university? How does it feel? How does it think? And how does it act? So that's pretty much my research, and the way I'm researching it is by combining philosophy, design thinking, and theories coming from pedagogy, especially critical pedagogy and signature pedagogy. Teaching, I teach a lot of very different courses. I'm coordinating the masters in ICT-based educational design, which is professional teachers and pedagogues coming to take a master's at the university to get ready for this kind of new institution, new technologies, new pedagogical practices. How are we going to do that in a very dialogical, collaborative way? Then I teach game courses, I teach game design courses, and I teach courses on web communication, viral communication, and stuff like that.
So if I can just walk this back, first of all, I need to figure out a way to clone you and bring you to every university on earth. Second, it's fascinating to me that you are both researching the changing university in an academic way, involving a great deal of diverse theory from diverse domains, where at the same time that informs your teaching, both your pedagogy and also your strategy, that you're preparing students for not this university, but the next generation university. I find that fascinating and admirable.
Yeah, so I'm pretty much working in 3 dimensions at once. So so higher education philosophy, I'm actually giving a keynote in higher education philosophy in the fall, which is going to be really scary. And I'm going to give a keynote on designing the future university for philosophers. So that's kind of really abstract but playful thinking and hard fun. And then that's kind of the macro level of my thinking. And then there's the meso level, which is my design practice, design thinking. So philosophy is very nice, but how do we materialize philosophy into designs? How do we materialize educational values, pedagogical visions, and make them come true, so to speak? And why would we want to do that? So that's the whole design thinking line of my way of being as an academic. And then the pedagogical practice. It's very nice to be at a comfortable distance of the messiness of education, but we also have to practice what we preach or what we think to really experience how education feels, both as a teacher and as a student, how it's experienced, what experience to draw from that, and then really try to evaluate and validate those virtues. It's really nice to say that we want a more compassionate university or a more playful university, but if we don't try to invite for that through our designs and then validate if that actually happens, then it's only nice words.
Friends, I have all kinds of questions I want to ask. And I could really, really run away with the next 45 minutes myself. So let me just remind you that your job is to ask questions as well. So if you haven't already, think about using either the chat box to quickly ask a question, or the raised hand to join us on stage, or the question mark just to throw us a text question. And we already have one, and this is from Carol, who asks a very, very good, very practical question, which is, how do the administrators at your university, Dr. Norgard, how do they accept your work?
Oh, and there's actually different, again, dimensions of answers to that question. So being a teacher on the floor, so to speak, I find that surprisingly enough, everything is possible. So we have a lot of systems at Danish University. I'm sure you have as well. A lot of formalities, learning management systems, guidelines and principles we have to adhere to, and so forth. But as a design thinker, these are creative constraints that I have to think subversively, sidestepping those to make that kind of educational experience I know is important come true. So, for example, so on the floor level of teaching practice, I've never been caught doing something I wasn't supposed to do, no matter how crazy my teaching looked like, because I also always gave the system what the system needed, and so I'm often doing 2 things at once.
So you're leading a double life.
Yes, yeah, and I find that's very, very practical if you want to be playful, for example, in our teaching, or if you want to experiment freely and be with our students. Actually, we can often think that the systems are the truth, or how teaching is supposed to be, and then just feed the system. The system must have what the system needs, but otherwise we are actually quite free to do all other kinds of things.
That's a nice balance. Thank you. And a terrific question, Carol. Very, very practical question. We have another question that's come up from Ted Newcomb, who I think is in Arizona right now. And Ted asks, how do you see gamification factoring into design?
Oh, that's an excellent question that pushes some of my buttons as a game scholar as well. So I did a PhD in game studies, looking at games as certain kinds of interaction and experiences design. That's actually what I brought with me into education. So I'm not actually trained in education. So yeah, we can talk about that later. I'm actually trained in poetry, but that's another story. Yeah, and I use that a lot as well to make education poetic. But to answer the question about gamification, so I worked a lot in game studies, studying game designs and how certain kinds of game designs invite for certain kinds of experiences and certain kinds of interactions. And of course, you could say in a certain way, that's what gamification is about, to try to steal game mechanics and employ them in another system, such as education. Mm-hmm. However, I find it very problematic, some of the ways that has been done, because it often ends up being about surface mechanics, such as point badges and leaderboards, and not so much about the deeper experiential values of being in play. So I often say that we should shift from gamification to piedification. Piedification being about the playfulness of education rather than the gamefulness. Gamification is very nice. It's very clean to look at. It's very orderly. It's very systematic. You can understanding. It puts things into systems. And I think that's why it's such a powerful concept, especially to kind of technologists, educational developers, administrators and stuff. It keeps things into place. Piedification is much more annoying because it makes things chaotic, Dionysian. There's a lot of things going on that doesn't quite make sense. There's a lot of imagination going on. What if? How can we? What happens if? There's a lot of transgression and borders getting crossed and stuff because that's the nature of play. But you could also say that's the nature of research in a certain way. So I find the piedification and the playfulness of education a much more powerful concept than gamification. That was a very long answer. Sorry, I'm a humanistic scholar, so I tend to answer things with many words.
I understand. That's my own background. But you'll find, I think, as well, that the forum participants tend to ask very, very good questions.
Yes.
And so, Ted, thank you. Thank you for that question. And Professor Norgard, thank you. That was a fantastic answer. I love the idea of piedification. In fact,
so it's actually a concept coming from Professor Franz Meyer from Finland. He hasn't written much about it, but he kind of threw it out there, and then I catched it. And I haven't written anything about it yet, but a very nice book to start your thinking is Miguel Sicar's book called Play Matters, because he actually has this my favorite quote about this is that we shouldn't play in education. And play has no place in education, I usually say, which really, really annoys people and kind of, rubs them the wrong way. But that's a way to get a conversation going. So there's a difference between play and playfulness, and being playful with something and being playful in education still respects the boundary of the object of education. Because, and now I put on my philosophy hat, because education is never free. Education only makes sense if we want something to happen to someone in a certain way for specific purposes. That's kind of the definition of pedagogy or teaching, and also about this very, very Danish or Nordic concept called dannelse, which is Bildung or pedagogical formation. So the formation of the hand, head, and hearts of our students. We always have a certain vision about how we want those hand, head, and hearts to kind of become So we don't want them to be cruel, for example, or we don't want them to go out and be horrible citizens or something like that. Whatever that means, that's when it becomes messy again. So Miguel Sicard's book, Play Matters, is a very powerful read if you want to try to put a bit of Dionysian, chaotic play into education.
Oh, very nice. And he's just down the road from you. He's at the Copenhagen, right?
Yeah, well, that's not down the road in Denmark. It's a very, very small country, but Copenhagen is in the other end of the country. So yeah, yeah. For you, it would be down the road.
Yes. Down the road. Yes. But thank you for the citation. I just put this in the chat box along with my attempt to spell Gamification, as well as a quick note on Bildung. Ted had a follow-up question for this, which is really precise. And let's see what you make of this. He asks, do you tie gamification into badges and micro-credentials?
Yeah, so if you want to stay within, if you want to treat gamification a bit more nicely than I just did, no, not necessarily. The problem is that the administrators and the systems in education often end up doing PBL gamification. So that's point badges and leaderboards. But that's not how it necessarily has to be. Sebastian Dietering, to throw out another name, he's the most powerful thinker within gamification, and he's the one doing it most powerfully, I think. He made some sense of that concept, and he's also a designer, so he also put that into practice. And he talks about moving from gamification to gameful design. Again, trying to scratch the surface, go a bit deeper, and try to put into practice some of the deeper mechanics of games, rather than only point badges, leaderboards. Then perhaps some of the ways that, I don't know, quests functions in World of Warcraft, or the way you kind of band together to go on a mission, and there's a system that almost automatically make those groups get into place, a bit like this system actually, right? And then the more important things is free to happen, because we don't have to use a lot of energy of putting the group together or banding up and going on a mission. There is a mission, we are signing up for that mission, and then we are banding to make that happen. So I often, when I try to think about that in designing education, talk about open-ended education as something in between gameful and playful design. So education should never be like a free sandbox where everything could happen, because then it becomes random what we learn and what happens and what takes place. And education should never be random. So we need perhaps technologies or designs that are put some structures or framework or creative constraints, a designer would say, around our thinking, and puts us on a mission. And that mission should be what the design is all about. It shouldn't be about the point badges and leaderboards. That's almost like getting grades in education. I don't even know if they're important, but they're there at least, right?
Yes.
And we tend to put a lot of emphasis on them because they're there. And that's perhaps my worry with gamification, and actually most other educational systems, that they tend to shape the reality of education because of the way their design tells us stuff about how we're supposed to talk together, what we're supposed to feel, how we're supposed to be, based on how that design is actually designing education as a system.
Oh, I love this idea of an open-ended education design. So it's almost a sandbox, but you control the parameters and you nudge people towards certain quests and outcomes. One quick question came up, which was when you mentioned philosophy, are you doing continental philosophy, phenomenology, Anglo-American? What kind of philosophy?
Yeah, so my PhD on gameplay corporality was very much into phenomenology or phenomenography, which is a certain kind of phenomenology which is more absorbed about getting a handle on the experience and the interaction rather than perhaps the people and stuff like that.
Interesting. Good. Thank you. That was a quick question.
Yeah. Okay. So I will just say I'm a kind of phenomenological thinker. I also think that kind of gets true. Recently, I've been reading into virtue ethics, which I found like the most important part of being an educational designer, because we design virtues and values into our systems. And either we do that, and into our teaching, whenever I design a course or design an activity, I put certain virtues in there or values, and I can do that unconsciously and or subconsciously, or I can do it reflectively. So I'm trying to systematize that way of doing it, and I really hate that word. But think about how we want to do value-based, vision-driven educational design thinking, so that I actually can put into word the values that I teach for. Is it empathy? Is it compassion? Is it community? Is it citizenship? Is it criticality? Is it creativity? They are all really, really nice values, but I can't have them all. So what are the value or the values that I'm teaching and designing for? And actually I should, take my own medicine. So they should also be the values that I then evaluate the course on. So did you feel that I was empathic? Did you feel that this was a collective? Did you feel that dialogue was an inherent part of this course? And we rarely do that. So so that's been really interesting. Yeah.
You should definitely
sometimes I keep the values hidden to see if that makes sense. Sometimes I say, well, these are the values I would like to be central in my lectures or in the classroom. So please let me know if that's not happening, because then we need to go into a dialogue about how we are gonna keep the core of the educational experience.
It really shows your background in game design too.
Yes.
But before I go into that, we had another question. But before we do that, let me just remind everybody that if you click on the raised hand button, we can beam you up on stage, and you can speak out loud and wave your hands, and we can all see your smiling face. So please do that. If
I would find that a bit scary if I was in the audience.
But it's so easy, and people are
we're
nice.
playful people, right? So we are not scary at all.
Not too scary. Well, while people are mulling that over, and they have other questions, we have a text question that just came up. And Tara, if you just flashed it, this is from Taylor Kendall, who asks, when it comes to design thinking in education, how do we move from theoretical to practical? I've seen educators experience the energy inherent in the process, but don't see the use in daily practice. Good question.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I can try to give sort of an answer, but I think if I have to give like a fulfilling answer, it's going to be a very long answer. So perhaps just some hints of where to go and perhaps look a bit for that as well. So what I've been doing, so design thinking is kind of a bit like philosophy, right? So it's very nice, but it's also kind of abstract. It has a lot of ideologies, and there's some kind of process that we go through when we design a course or an activity. What I've been working with to kind of make it more material or materialize better is design patterns or educational patterns or pedagogical patterns. There's different names for that. And I find that a very useful method, especially if you already have some experience teaching, or is in a teacher collective where there are someone that has had positive experiences teaching. And what you do basically is you find some kind of value or vision that you would like to design for. So for example, citizenship or dialogue, online dialogue. It's really hard to do online dialogues in teaching. You often end up doing like screencasts or MOOCs or online learning resources or something like that. So if you want to design for online dialogues, you start up by having that as the core value. The core vision is to meet and talk and explore thinking, as we are kind of doing now. And then we look at our teaching practice and we try to identify instances where that happened in our teaching. It doesn't have to be online. And then describe that into a pattern. And then we end up by having a lot of patterns, which is on the meso level. So it's not like close descriptions of what happened, but I made that activity or used that technology, or in my research I talk when I write journal papers or something like that. So we could do that. So it doesn't even have to be in teaching. Or at home, my children talk on Skype while they play games with people from like France and Finland and stuff like that. And then you kind of map all those patterns and put in kind of a repository and draw inspiration from that has this kind of mid-range concreteness that makes you get ideas to try stuff out with a certain technology, a certain activity, a certain idea. So we had if you look up hybrid education or hybrid pedagogy and then EduClub. Actually, we did a workshop a couple of years ago. We've met like 10 people and made 80 patterns for hybrid education. And it's all online and free in like Google Folders, because we all believe in open research, not only open education. So it's there to steal if anything could inspire it, and also there to get an idea about how to move from design thinking into design practice as a way of teaching.
Just two very, very quick questions. What was it EduPlum?
EduPlop is EduPlop.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's a great name. Thank you.
And actually, there's different kinds of workshops in there. I think there's a whole workshop on assessment as well, if that's something you also find somewhat problematic to make meaningful at certain points. Yeah.
Well, the second quick question is, when you're referring to patterns, are you by any chance referencing Christopher Alexander's pattern language idea?
Yeah.
Okay.
So again, combining different kinds of stuff like architecture, design, and pedagogy. Pedagogy is also architecture, right? Pedagogy is also design. Pedagogy is also philosophy. Yeah. And poetry.
I'm coming back to that. We have two people who want to join us up on stage. Can we beam up Tom Hames, please? Let's see if we can do this without too much trouble. I feel like I need a sound effect to bring him up. Okay. And there we. Hey, Tom.
Hey. Good evening.
Good evening.
In Denmark, I assume. So, one of the frustrations I've had as a teacher, it's not a frustration because I think I'm relatively good at it, but designing games for class or designing games into the class is a complicated thing to get right. I mean, I've spent many, many, many years doing individual scenario games that I've refined over the years. I've done gamification within the structure of the class, and there are always things that go wrong, and you do have to apply design thinking and iterate and all this other stuff, but that's a lot to ask for most teachers. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on the concept of, game design for idiots.
Did you get something? He was talking about game design in class. Tom, are you back?
Yeah. You got, okay. So, game design is very tough, and I've spent many, many years on various games, and some of which are constant works in progress. But, advice for teachers who want to use this more effectively in class, because if you get it wrong, you actually end up accentuating some of the extrinsic motivators of class. I mean, you end up making everything into, like you said, the point system, the badges, and all this sort of, stuff, and taking away from the lesson and too much focus on the game. And as they say, good design is 99% invisible. So, but I'm curious if you have any good sources, any suggestions in that, because it's tough. It really is.
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of books that I find very, if you want to make games, very useful, like the play-centric approach book. I forgot the title now. I think it's just called something like game design, a play-centric approach or something, player-centric approach, which I find very useful again, because in education we need to iteratively check if that makes sense to students, what we're doing. But just to roll the question back a bit, I think asking teachers to be game designers is just as difficult as asking teachers to be educational designers. Or we are all educational designers all the time when we're teachers, right? Because we plan activities and we make courses and curricula and stuff like that. But we're not necessarily intentional, reflective design thinkers in the way that, having design as a profession or something like that. So there's a lot of tacit knowledge going on. We can also have a lot of tacit knowledge about what games are and what a good game is, but doesn't mean that we are good game designers, and especially not in education. So what I've been working a lot with is actually not making games, but making students making games. So I've been using game jams as a pedagogical process. I also have a game chapter coming out in a book that's probably going to take a year. But we also had a short paper on game jams as a pedagogy. And what I found useful is if it's set up correctly, it's a way for students to put into practice theories, for example. So I've been using theory jams. So they get different kinds of theoretical perspectives, like existentialism, phenomenology, positivism, something like that. And then each group of students get a scientific paradigm or something like that, or a philosophy discipline. And then they have to make a game based on that text. And then they have to every time I ask a question about the game, they have to argue based on the text. So they have to have some central quotes, and all their design decisions are based on how they read the text. And what they then, for example, find is that the game based on positivism and the game based on phenomenology looks really, really different, because they put the world into play in very different ways. And that actually makes often more sense in academia or in higher education than me making a game, because I learn a lot when I make games, and it's that kind of learning experience that I actually want to give to my students, the kind of higher order thinking and making design arguments and critically reading theory, because we want to make a game that catches the spirit of whatever book, play, philosophy, mathematical concept that we are trying to do. And then I don't need any game design skills. I only need really, really good pedagogical skills, which is also sort of a game design skill. But yeah, I don't know if that's.
In the chat box, Kisa just said that. She just mentioned teachers are designers, and she goes on to say they don't learn it in school; they learn it by doing. And that's,
So Donald Schoen, if you know The Reflective Practitioner, wonderful book, Reflective Practitioner, really talks about that. And that's also what I mean by tacit knowledge. But sometimes it's very difficult at least when I was a teacher in the beginning and not like being infested by educational theories and stuff like that. It was difficult for me to actually argue and explain why I was doing exactly what I was doing. I could sense it was right. I could kind of feel what was working. So I also read a lot of philosophy on the body. And I could express teaching with my body. but that doesn't mean that I have like that it's research to me, or that it's systematic in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think every teacher should not be researching teaching, or being a professional game designer, but again, rather trying to gain some frameworks of vocabulary for the visions and the values, and then try to put them into play by making. So if my value is, that was what it was for the theory jam, was for students to understand, it was in a game course, to understand why they were reading more than one text on the avatar. I had a lot of students coming from computer science, and they were like, Rikke, can't you just give us the right text on avatars? And I was like, well, the way we think about avatars is quite different in philosophy, in media studies, in information studies, in religion, and in computer science. And the text you read are gonna mold your thinking about how to do avatars in games. So it's and I was saying all this stuff, and it's quite important that you read the text and think about how they're different and how they might impact your profession when you get out of the university. And
games
they all
force you to be a little meta, right?
Yeah,
They force you to
they
be a
were
bit
all,
meta and
they were
step
all,
back and look at everything else, in the context. Absolutely.
and I was preaching that all the time, and they were like nodding, but I could see when I read their exam papers that they didn't really get it. But then I made them make different avatar games based on the different texts, and then they were really like, "Wow, why did you make that game?" They had a ludology text that were really about systems, so there were no kind of character depth or story or narrative around it. And then somebody had like Jenkins' work on narrative architecture or something like that. So they didn't really, have that much of a game system, but they had like this world, and that really made them see what I was trying to say to them. So that way of making them, almost by chance in their view, make stuff that made them realize what I usually spend like a couple of months trying to explain them in 3 hours, is a really powerful pedagogical tool and a way of using game as a technique or as a technology in your teaching. I could also have done it with like robots or dolls or something like that. I also tried to make the computer science students more uncomfortable, because I made them in one course perform games with their bodies, and that's sometimes a bit more uncomfortable to game students, to go on stage and like pretend to be the game controller, and another one pretend to be the avatar, and another one pretend to be, I don't know, the animals in the game world or something like that.
That's great. What a fantastic thing to do,
Awesome.
especially for a face-to-face class.
I will vacate the stage and let someone else up here, though. Thank you
we
very
have room.
much.
Thank you so much for a very good question.
Thank you, Tom. Tom is he's educational technology background as well as a faculty background, and now works at an architecture firm. I mean, extraordinary man.
Oh, yeah. Well, I also think about myself as a Renaissance researcher, so yeah. So Thomas might also be that. Yeah.
Excellent. You guys are in the same tribe. We have Renee wants to join us on stage. Tara, let's see if Renee is capable of being beamed up. See, now, if I'm thinking of Denmark, I want to have some good, some Viking metal music happening.
Yes, excellent.
I wrote just for the information of everybody here, I sent in a text question and I'm suddenly beamed up on stage. So, but anyway, here I am. And the question that I asked, so you're not alone. In fact, how many people can get on stage at one time?
Up to 4.
We could have somebody else can come join me, or us. So my question was related to the topic of this particular Future Trends talk caught my attention, because here I am at Penn State University, which is sort of a big university, and wondering about the future of sort of brick and mortar institutions with the growth of online, with less tenure track positions as people retire, so more like adjunct or part-time faculty, and less research faculty. Maybe there's more of a buffet style learning approach, more funding for STEM, less money for liberal arts, and maybe even some differences of opinion about the value of liberal arts, and more MOOCs, badging, micro-credentialing. Where do you see the future role of brick and mortar institutions, and all of those trends? How are they going to impact the future of education as we know it? That was my question.
That's a very big
nice
question.
Light one.
And actually, I did talks on that, and there's a lot of talks in there. So I'll just gonna attack some parts of it, perhaps, or pick at some parts of it. So the brick and mortar part. So I also read a lot of philosophy on space and place, and gave a talk on the online campus. And there's also online universities, and universities tends to start to think of themselves as like global institutions. And one of the things we see happening when universities do that, think of themselves as online or as global, there's also the whole globalized education trend, is that they actually tend to lose their signature somehow, or lose grasp of their identity, and also of the identity of their students. That becomes kind of numbers floating around, or random people having, for example, in a MOOC, having a one-way monologue with a system. And so at least when we think about higher education philosophy, that hasn't quite seeped down into the systems and the brick and mortar. Yes, we see kind of a turn. So there's a material turn in research in general, but we also see a material turn in universities, that the ones that did that, the ones that really went for the online campus and the globalized education, having campuses in Singapore, in Europe, in the States, and in the UK, for example, they have a hard time making that work for them, actually. And work for them also on kind of the whole ranking thing, which is important to universities. Work for them in student satisfaction, which is also important to universities, because the students don't feel they belong anywhere. So the Heidegger understanding of dwelling and being and belonging somewhere with somebody and becoming someone in particular. For that, we need some brick and mortar, because we are brick and mortar bodies somehow. That doesn't mean that we can't do online education, because we're doing online education or whatever we are doing right now. But I'm also looking into your brick and mortar and contemplating what is on the wall behind you. It looks very systematic. My office looks, this is actually not my office because my technology was dysfunctional, but in my office I have a lot of moomins and candles and stuff like that. And then there's Brian's office, which is a bit like my office
This isn't my office. This is
exactly.
This is a library media studio.
So the brick and mortarness of the university is also this. It is also being online together. But we often tend to forget the hybridity or the hybrid possibilities of the future university. So often it's based on an understanding that it's more effective, or we can save money, or everyone can do their own kind of education in their own time, at their own pace, and that would be awesome. But what it tends to make is very lonely students feeling secluded from the world, and not having this kind of Bildung or pedagogical formation of the hand, head, and hearts, but rather receiving some knowledge from an open educational resource.
Well, and even when we have technology like shindig where we can be talking to one another and all together as a group, we do tend to kind of default to the sage on a stage, kind of take in the information. And I mean, I wanted to post a texted question and have you answer it and just sort of take it in and not necessarily interact or engage fully in this way.
Oh, but now you did.
But here I am. So yeah.
That makes a very big difference, right? So,
yes.
So for me, it's not about technology or not technology. Technology is also materiality or material to me. But again, it goes back to those educational values, right? So if we want to have a feeling of being in dialogue with each other's thinking and being close and feeling present to each other, I do online education based on those values, for example. And what is fun is that the student surveys that we do, because we have to, actually they feel that I'm more present and I'm more there than in most other on-site educational courses, and that's really, really interesting.
What do you do to have that effect?
This, like, you feel, I hopefully the ones on stage. So I have all my students kind of on stage when I have this group thing. And now I'm much more closer to you than if I was in a lecture hall and you were sitting in the audience, right? So you feel that I'm more there. I also do mimics and do body slightly different than if I was on a large stage giving a talk. I also try to come somewhat unprepared because again, that goes back to the open-endedness, that also makes room for us to think together. I don't have all the information I'm gonna hand to you, because then I could just make a video, right? I wanna make you think, and I want you to make me think, like we're doing right now. So by really going for that, it's so interesting that the students feel that I'm more there and more there for them and more caring than when I do flesh and brick and mortar teaching that I'm also doing at the university.
Thank you.
Fascinating. Oh, great question, Renee. And by the way, Renee is at a famous institution in the United States. I mean, this is a leading public university, state-supported more or less, but it's in a state serving a population that is dwindling and aging in many ways, like most of Europe. So they also have many, many campuses. I don't know how many you have, like 27 or something right now, spread across the strait. And
I can't count that high. Like, I know I'm at a business school. Yeah, I can't remember how many, because it seems to grow. But so about 3/4 of my portfolio is fully online courses offered through the Smeal College of Business, but delivered via the World Campus. And then I support a lot of our large enrollment courses, which are anywhere from 400 to a few thousand students in one class. So it's an interesting place to be.
Well, and I'm glad you came here. Thank you.
Thanks.
But I'm conscious of time, friends. We only have about 5 minutes left, and we had several questions on the queue. Renee, stick around for a minute, because we have room for you on stage, and you might want to jump in. There's a question from Ed Harris, I think. Tara, do I have that right? Is it Ed Harris?
And I will try to answer them more to the point then.
Oh, you'll be fine. Ed Gray, as you redesign pieces of a course or an entire course, are you increasingly trying to make your content, student activities, gaming modules, etc., mobile friendly?
So for I think that goes for the online part of my teaching, I guess. It's always mobile friendly somehow or not. So if they are going to write a big assignment, it's not very mobile friendly unless you are really good at texting. But I always try to make it so. A lot of my supervision takes place in the car or in the forest, walking the dog, or at home with my kids, interrupting what I'm doing. Can you hear me still? Okay, so it was just Brian that disappeared. Okay, so I'll just continue and he'll, yeah. So you can be Brian for now, Renee. So it's mobile friendly. I use a lot of Google Hangouts, for example, as a room that is open to the world. I have a lot of speakers coming from the outside, and that you can have with you on the run, so to speak. And I do a lot of asynchronous mobile learning as well, using Google Docs, using a lot of Facebook actually also, because that's what I have with me when I go to bed at night. And I like to just check up on the students before I go to bed, because I have a very busy kind of academic research schedule regime. So I want to have time for the students, and I check Facebook before I fall to sleep. And then I also just check in on the students, and right now they are asking for they need a philosophy on courage, because they're doing their educational designs and they want to design for courage in primary schools, technological courage in primary schools for primary school teachers. So they need a philosophy on courage. So I'm going to go home and find some philosophy on courage for them.
Well, there's your virtues philosophy, right?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. We had a quick question, and this is a clarification question. It's from Leslie Harris, and she asks if you could explain in a bit more detail what you mean by hand-hidden heart. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. That's what Leslie was. I think.
Yeah. So it's
hand, head, and heart, right?
Yeah. So it's hand, head. Oh, that's not the head. Hand, head, and heart. Yeah. So the best and easiest and most to the point explanation is looking up Schulman on signature pedagogy. There's like a 4-page read that really, really precisely and very, very actually in depth explains the hand, head, and heart. But as I can give a very short explanation. So signature pedagogy basically is in 3 dimensions. There's the hidden curriculum. That's all the virtue value thing I've been talking about, and that's the hidden curriculum we always have in our teaching, whether we know it or not. Then there's the deep structures, which is kind of like the patterns we have been talking about, the deep pedagogical structure of our pedagogy. And then there's a surface structure, which might be the point badges, leaderboards we've been talking about. And that's what we see when we enter into the classroom. And often when we talk about playful education or fun education or motivating education or whatever, that's what it looks like on the surface. And then we say, oh, they are, fun games in education. It's about making people play games in education, because then it's visible on the surface. But it's the deep structure, and especially the hidden curriculum, that come to shape the hand, head, and heart of the students. So it's the closest international thing I found to this very important Danish concept called Dannelse, or Bildung in German.
Yes.
And it's about checking if the hand, head, and heart of your students kind of become in a way that you intended them to become. So you're never in control. You can't decide the hand, head, and hearts of your students, but you can make a very, very strong invitation through your pedagogy or through your educational design or the way you set up technology. So, for example, the way Brian set up this technology doesn't ensure that any dialogue will actually go on, and it might not even feel dialogical to the participants, not on the stage, right? But we try to, or you try to, now I'm just reading you, try to make an experience of something somewhat spontaneous, thinking in action,
yes,
not having anything planned. I don't have a manuscript. I have a lot of like random scribbles that I don't really actually use because we are thinking together.
Yes.
And again, then if we do that for a whole semester, then the thing that the students might take with them is also an interest or a drive to do thinking that way, feel that they are not gonna get crossed, or Renee can talk about that when they get on stage, that they are actually respected and treated with care and stuff like that. And then they also tend to like treat other people with care and respect through dialogue. So that's how they feel. And then the other hands, setting up a dialogue. I ask my students to set up their own conferences, for example, or set up their own seminars and webinars and invite people like Brian, because then I can just, sit back and have fun. So again, the head, hand, and heart, that actually became a very long answer. The head, hand, and heart by Schulman. And if you find the concept interesting, there's like a couple of books called Exploring Signature Pedagogy. And the point with signature pedagogy is that each profession has its own signature. Nursing, education, design, gaming, religion. Being a priest, for example, is something quite different, hand, head, and heart-wise, than being a computer programmer. So again, that's a hand, head, and heart of education, and it's also the hand, head, and heart of the students.
I have to say, this is a bizarre moment to pause on, because we are over time.
Sorry.
And people, no. You are fantastic. You are a bounty of thinking, and I want to pause and say we do have to wrap up. Rikke, can we bring you back later this year, maybe in fall, so that we can continue thinking together out loud? I would love that.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been so much. Look, I got like rosy cheeks from all the fun I have.
That's
so,
always
absolutely.
a good sign.
Yeah.
I can have rosy cheeks, but it's hard to say.
And just to come with a couple of very, very practical canons to have some ammunition if you want to play around with this. So there's the Innovating Pedagogy report from the Open University. And the one from 2016 is really, really interesting because it talks about productive failure and learning from the crowd and all that kind of stuff. So you can take that and then point to it and say, that's why I do teaching this way. It's innovating pedagogy. And that's often very useful for administrators and stuff. And what is extremely interesting is the Innovating Pedagogy report from 2017. It just came out, and it's so humanistic, artsy, liberal arts flavored. It has like so it has thing on intergroup empathy and learning with internal values and stuff like that. That is really, really nice, and it has references and patterns, and you can just like steal all the stuff. So, Innovating Pedagogy report. I use that when I have to.
Well, I think the
out stuff.
That's from Britain's Open University, right?
Yes.
Well, I think Britain is in great need of intergroup empathy right now. Yes.
Well, aren't we all? Denmark as well? Perhaps also the States. I don't.
Oh yeah, I don't want to talk about that. First, Renee, thank you for coming up on stage. I'm really glad to see you and to hear you.
Thank you.
I'm looking. I haven't been to the World Campus for a while. I look forward to visiting back again. And Rikke, thank you so much for being a fantastic person. What a fountain of energy and thoughts. What terrific answers you've given. By the way, I just want to say thank you. A shout out to Jim Groom for connecting us. He's a previous guest on the Future Trends Forum and a dear friend. So thank you. We need to wrap up, and we need 1 minute to point to next week's stuff. So Renee, and above all, Rikke, thank you again for coming. I'll follow up online and recording more.
Me. I had so much fun.
That's the best thing we could hear. My pleasure. My pleasure. And friends, as we bring up the slides just to describe where we're going next week, let me just thank everybody for such provocative, penetrating, and subtle questions. Ted, Ed, Leslie, everybody, and Renee. Speaking of innovative pedagogy, next week, the day after Valentine's Day, we're going to be meeting with Bonnie Stewart and Natalie Deckard. These are two people who are leading a fascinating new class. The class is called Engagement in a Time of Polarization. It's an open online class, a kind of MOOC, and starting in a few weeks. So, or actually, I think it'll be starting next week. So we'll get a chance to dive in. This is a class that's all about trying to build citizen engagement and to cross borders between different groups and divisions. It's a really kind of an anti-MOOC in many ways. And these are people who were deeply involved, by the way, in our reading of Paulo Freire, and people who are really interested in using technology for innovative pedagogy. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those two. I think you'll really enjoy and learn a lot from them. Speaking of learning, we just also want to mention that we started reading in our book club soonish, and just yesterday posted the first post about the first 3 chapters of this book. So this is a book looking at 10 major technologies that are likely to have some impact in the future. And so far, these are major, big engineering technologies in this first 3 chapters. The Wiener-Smiths are fantastic to read. They're funny, they're engaging. It's a great marvel of pedagogy. I can't recommend this enough, and people are having a riot with it. So please dig in with soonish. And then if you don't have enough to think about, enough to read about, you can always go to the FTTE report to learn more about that, or go to shindig.com to learn more about our technologies. And let me see you next week. Thank you all for coming. Bye-bye.